The January 6th committee held their final hearings this week, voting unanimously on a criminal referral for President Donald Trump. They have not released their full report yet. It's been delayed and may be released tomorrow. But we want to talk a little bit about what this actually means for the political future for President Donald Trump, who has already said this is a kangaroo court, who has already worked to invalidate any of the findings of the January 6th committee. And remember, even with everything that we saw previously, Republicans came within only a couple points of taking control of both the House and the Senate this year. And it's very likely they'll have a strong challenge in 2024, whether it's President Trump or someone else. To talk a little bit about the political future of President Donald Trump, we're joined by Dr. Nola Haynes from Georgetown University. Dr. Haynes, how are you doing today?
Thank you so much, and happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you also. So, we've been playing this whack-a-mole in this country for the last half decade about whether or not this will be the thing that gets Donald Trump. Is this the thing that will get Donald Trump?
Listen, I'm going to tell you what the nuns used to say and what my papa used to say. Empty wagons make the most noise. Listen. Credibility, 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 and homie ain't got none. That's all I have to say. I mean, he's going to make noise. He's going to sell more of his little superhero cards. But at the end of the day, I think, I think that people understand that he's more of a liability than he is helpful on the campaign trail. And to your point, yes, there were some people that came very close to winning, some very tight races. But at the end of the day, it's first past the post. And because I think they had such a large anvil dragging behind their candidates, they didn't get past the post. And at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. I'm really not trying to pay no dust to, his political future or not. I'm more focused on where the country is going and excited for where it's heading.
So what do these charges against President Trump mean, or the criminal referral for President Trump? Can you kind of break down each of the referrals against him and what the Justice Department will need to do in order to actually prove them?
Well, I have a thing where I try not to come across as an expert in areas that I'm not an expert in. So I'm not a lawyer, but I will say, I've taught enough policy and law classes, and I do have a larger understanding of some of these things. And so the first thing that people need to understand, the referral does not mean that the DOJ will automatically will actually prosecute. So that's one thing that people need to understand. I've been kind of explaining that quite a bit today because I feel like there's some confusion when it comes to a referral and when it comes to what the actual action is of the DOJ. And so, these are very strong. This is a very strong referral. You're seeing things like obstruction. You're seeing inciting an insurrection. This is unprecedented. And I think to your earlier question, when we think and talk about the former president, we have to understand he is an extreme outlier. Norms do not apply here. So there's a lot of conversation about precedent, that this is unprecedented, that it will, do damage to the norms in terms of, presidents and how they act and how they behave. No president, not even Richard Nixon, has come close to the amount of damage that the former president has done to the country and to our reputation abroad. There are national security implications here. There are foreign affairs implications here. But, to your specific questions about the 4 charges, the one that stuck out to me was, the January 6th committee went there and they are really tying him to this insurrection. If for people out there who watched the January 6th committee hearings, season 1, 2, and 3, I was glued to my television having multiple conversations about it. And then recently, their referral, this is serious business. And I still think about Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony. It was pretty powerful. And I think that if the DOJ does go ahead and decide to prosecute him on even just one of these charges, he's in big trouble.
Now, speaking of precedents, people have been comparing this to Richard Nixon and his impeachment and the subsequent pardon by President Gerald Ford. And I've heard Geraldo Rivera on Fox News say that, well, even if Trump is convicted, that President Biden should pardon him for the good of the nation to bring the country back together. Do you think that going forward, we may see President Biden pardon President Trump to try to stop his supporters from potentially doing a January 6th style insurrection, but on a national level?
I'm going to try to keep this cute. But as a national security professional, I have got to tell you, I believe that he is a national security risk. And it goes beyond what's going to heal the country are consequences. Like I said, this president was such an outlier. We cannot think about him the same way that we thought about Nixon. Compared to Nixon, Donald Trump is kind of like the teenager. I mean, Richard Nixon is like the teenager who stole a pack of gum, compared to some of the crimes that have been leveled against the former president, Donald Trump. I think people really need to stop thinking about this situation in terms of norms or what has happened before. Precedent does not apply. Precedent does not apply in any sense of the word regarding this man. And honestly, in my personal opinion, the only thing that's going to heal this country are consequences, because it's going to do two things. Not just give Americans that sense of, no one is above the law. I think that's first and foremost. And it's going to really set an example for those, who might be trying it. And then actually there's a third advantage, as a national security foreign policy person. The damage that was done to our reputation internationally, the Biden-Harris administration has done a great job at trying to repair that. And we have to stand by our own word. If we say no one is above the law, we need to stand on that, because eyes are watching us around the world. A lot of damage was done in the prior administration, and there's a lot of repairing to do. So if we really mean that no one is above the law, you have to go ahead and prosecute this outlier to the fullest extent of the law. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. We cannot think about this man the way we have traditionally thought about presidents. I'm done with that.
Many people said that the impeachment of President Clinton in 1998 cheapened the instance of impeachment, that they knew they didn't have the votes in the Senate to remove him. The public opinion was against the impeachment, but they did it anyway. And then further, Republicans are now saying that, the two impeachments of Donald Trump cheapened the institution of impeachment. Do you think that this prosecution will cheapen presidential prosecution going forward, or it simply becomes the new tool that the party out of power uses to interrupt or to investigate or to stop the agenda of the current opposition president? Could we see going forward a January 6th style committee forming for every president whenever there's the other party has control of the House, and then a criminal referral for every president when the other party has control of the House? Will this become the new cycle, the new normal that we see?
And see, this is what's dangerous, and this what makes this a security risk. The fact that we are talking about this as if this is not an unusual set of circumstances. And I think that, this is one of the things that the Republican Party got very, very wrong. I'm not an advisor in that sort of sense, but I think they should have stuck to what they said after January 6th. If they would have not thought about how he was going to perform on the campaign trail versus saying, you know what, we all watched what happened on January 6th. Some of them were there. They heard what was said on the dais. They saw the tweet from December 19th. This is a very different situation. We cannot normalize this. And to your point, I understand what you're saying. I would think that it's more about fatigue than it is about, using this as a tool to get back at your enemies. By framing it that way is to take away the level of seriousness that this is. To have a person who thinks because you are the president, you can act unilaterally without any consequences, that is the dangerous precedent.
We think of the list of just all-time terrible presidents. There's Andrew Jackson, the Indian removal at the Trail of Tears. There's Andrew Johnson, curtailing Reconstruction after the Civil War. Of course, Richard Nixon and Watergate. There's Woodrow Wilson, one of the most racist presidents in American history. George W. Bush killed upwards of 1 million Iraqi civilians for literally no apparent reason. What does it say that we are prosecuting President Trump more thoroughly than any of these other presidents who arguably have done far worse things to humanity and killed far more people than President Trump for essentially, as his people would say, having a protest at the Capitol?
A protest at the Capitol, I think that is such a horrible way to kind of demean what happened on January 6th. People died. Police officers were injured, traumatic. They still suffer from trauma to a large degree. And as a person who sits here, who had more than a dozen family members die from COVID, we can have a conversation about that. I would not demean, the loss of life under that administration. And also you have to take into account the role that social media, context plays a large part in this. You have to think about the sign of the times. We wouldn't have found out about Watergate if Richard Nixon's vanity project of recording everyone did not exist. Technology plays a large part into where we are today. So because of social media, because of the way that we have access to information, the way that information can be retrieved from cell phones and videos and things like that, we are living in very different times. And I think without contextualizing the rest of the presidents, because yes, you can line them up, today is a very different day. And because we have access to different types of information, different types of intelligence, it absolutely makes sense to me in the age of social media that, we have more access to some of the things that the former president has done. And I just want to say one last thing. I was home in New Orleans and for Mardi Gras in 2020. And that is right before COVID hit. And one of the things that the mayor of New Orleans said over and over and over is that she got the green light to go ahead with Mardi Gras, that COVID, that it was fine. It was not fine. I lost 13 family members. And I need people to understand to go ahead and say that, this president lost more lives, that president, we're talking about lost lives domestically. And not to dismiss any lives lost foreign, but we're talking about domestically. And I think that last comment kind of really upset me. So that's why I'm kind of going back to it, because I don't want to disrespect anyone who has lost people during COVID, including my family.
You're absolutely correct. And kind of just the last question before we leave, what will it mean if the Congress does not or the DOJ does not prosecute President Trump for this? We've already seen the Trumpites, Kerry Lake, Herschel Walker, others denying their elections. What will happen if we do not hold President Trump accountable for this?
It would be a huge missed opportunity. I think it would tell the United States and the rest of the world that, yes, presidents are above the law, that, yes, they operate with immunity and they can operate like monarchs. And I think that that's the dangerous precedent. Like I said, when we started this conversation, that's the precedent we should be worried about, the only one. We need to hold everyone accountable. No one is above the law.
Thank you so much. Dr. Nola Haynes, Georgetown University, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks. Let's bring the panel back in. So, Scott, what do you think is going to happen with the DOJ? We've seen Merrick Garland be cagey and very measured when it comes to prosecution of the president, even the statements on prosecution of the former president. Do you think this will actually result in actual criminal charge against President Trump?
Well, that remains to be seen. The criminal referrals from the House HR report is relevant, probative, and material, but it won't be dispositive of what DOJ does. DOJ is investigating these same underlying facts and prosecuting the insurrectionists already. They have a special prosecutor investigating Trump's conduct in the January 6th insurrection, and DOJ will accept that material, review it, but review it in regard to what they have covered already in their investigation. How does it fit within their set of facts that they have? And then politically, remember this, the DOJ early on in this January 6th committee investigation was not cooperating with the committee. They didn't want the committee formed at one point, and then it got formed, it was moving forward, and then the committee would not share its information with DOJ. So the politics between the committee and DOJ have not been as clean as you would think and cooperative as you think they should be. Now that the report is done and they're now turning over this material, it will be added to the investigatory results DOJ has. But in the end, DOJ, if they bring charges against Donald Trump, and I anticipate that they will, at least there's enough there for them to do it, I anticipate that they will, then DOJ will bring its own charges and explain what its evidence is at a press conference, and then they'll have to go prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt in federal court. That's super important, because if he's acquitted, then all the work that has gone in with the committee and DOJ will be for naught. But more importantly, it sends an awful message, optics and substantively an awful message in regard to presidential misconduct and the lack of holding president's bad behavior for accountability purposes. So this isn't over. It's over in Congress, but it's not over with DOJ.
Joe, what do you think? Which of these charges do you think are actually the strongest? If you were going to put your prosecutor hat on, if you were to pick one of these charges to go forward on, what do you think is the biggest and best slam dunk that you think the DOJ would be able to actually prosecute him on? Because we all know often prosecution is throwing spaghetti at a wall and see what sticks. But if the DOJ brings weak charges and President Trump's able to come out of it saying, look, only one of the 4 charges stuck, I think he actually comes out stronger. What do you think will be the one kind of gravamonte that the DOJ hangs their hat on?
I think it really depends on whether or not the people that are evaluating this case can actually get out of their head. In my mind, inciting an insurrection is the clearest. I think it's crystal clear, but it's so unusual. It never happens. It's very, very rarely used. It hasn't been used since the Civil War. And if you can't get around that notion, how could it be so clear that something that hasn't been, prosecuted for 150 years or so is being prosecuted now? And should we actually connect to that from the DOJ standpoint? Should we actually bring this? How are people going to respond to this? That can be preclusive by itself, the lack of familiarity. But the irony is that I think that that's the clearest. That's the most obvious example. That's the most obvious manifestation of what actually happened. You can take his words. You can take cell phone messages and text messages. The special counsel who has really put his foot on the gas once he got involved last month is really taking this down the road. And by the way, Pete Aguilar, somebody I know, he's my congressman. I've been in the room when he's at fundraisers talking about the fact that they have staffs of former DOJ lawyers, former prosecutors. They're putting this thing together the right way, actually. And so the question becomes whether or not people can get their mind wrapped around the notion that this is so unusual, but that doesn't mean that this is not necessary for consideration for a criminal conviction, et cetera, because we haven't convicted anybody else. And to the point that the doctor just made a few minutes ago, the things that happened with COVID, the incompetence with which this presidency was gone about should be criminal in and of itself. But that's not what they're bringing. He killed a lot of people. He helped a lot of people die. He sped a lot of people's demise through what happened with COVID, or what should I say, what didn't happen. But the fact of the matter is, the inciting of the insurrection, frankly, is the clearest. That's what we've been talking about. The January 6th committee is about what? I keep saying the resurrection, but the insurrection. And so that ought to be the clearest, but because it's so unusual, and because people may be unfamiliar, and because of the underlying notion, will 1 out of the 12 people or the 10 people that are on the jury actually be connected to this underlying thing where they don't want to believe that a president ought to be convicted because they think it sends the wrong message. So you've got a lot of things. You've got to do what's right. But I think the unfamiliarity here may be the biggest obstacle, even though that may be the clearest charge.
I think this is a very tough decision. I would not want to be in Merrick Garland's shoes for this, especially when you have all the other investigations into President Trump. But this is absolutely something we have to monitor because, if you do this incorrectly, you convict Donald Trump on one count, then Don Jr. announces he's running for president. He wins on a platform of I'm going to pardon my dad. He pardons his dad, makes him vice president, resigns. We still got President Trump again. You can put nothing past the Trump era of American politics.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment. When you talk about blackness and what happens in black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it. This is about covering us.
Invest in black-owned media.
Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks.
We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind 100,000, so we want to hit that. Y'all money makes this possible.
Checks and money orders go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is Roland at RolandSMartin.com.